All right, good evening. It's time for us to go ahead and get started in our continued study, really a study through the Old Testament that we've been doing for a while, although we pretty much, as just a reminder, we finished up going through the chronology of the Old Testament and looking at our timeline, getting all of that squared away. So we then entered into an introduction of the wisdom literature. So far, we've spent a few weeks looking at Job, a couple weeks looking at the Psalms, or maybe just 1 week, since we had spent 12 weeks looking at the Psalms in our Bible class, our Wednesday night Bible class. And this evening, we're going to get into the Proverbs. Now, the Proverbs are a part of, as I said before, the wisdom literature. So it's been a while. So why don't we remind ourselves what is wisdom literature? And in particular, if you look at Proverbs as being an invitation to wisdom, and this is what I'm going to say, this is what Proverbs is. Proverbs is an invitation to wisdom. And that's going to make a lot more sense in just a few moments, why it is that I say that. But what is wisdom? How do I define wisdom? How about we start there? Joshua, do you remember? Somebody teaching wisdom, which is what it is that we're doing right here. Yeah, Jonathan? All right, Jonathan, in case, everybody heard Jonathan, right? Yeah. Jonathan, he said that wisdom is skill in the art of godly living. That is, that living a godly life, living the way that God wants us to live, is an art form. It's not just do whatever you want to do, live however you want to live, follow, some kind of mindset or whatever that you've created. It's actually an art form, and it requires skill. In fact, if you'll recall, the word for wisdom is the word that is used to talk about people who are skilled laborers. Remember when they constructed the tabernacle? And they had certain people who were skilled in this or skilled in that. In particular, they were wise in this or they were wise in that. And so the word wisdom is intricately tied to the idea of skill. And when you look at wisdom literature, what is probably its greatest characteristic, typically speaking? Yeah, Ryan? Okay, it is. It's highly applicable. It's kind of the point. But how do you know you're looking at wisdom literature? All right, because it's predominantly written in poetic form. We often think of it not just the wisdom literature, but we often also call it the books of what? The books of poetry, because those two things go hand in hand. Why is that? Okay, slow down for just a second, Cliff, and wait for the mic to come, because you were exactly right with that answer. I use those words because of his answer. So go ahead and repeat that.
Causes us to slow down so we can think about what we're reading.
Yeah, Cliff is exactly right on the whole purpose of wisdom literature being in poetic form. Poetic form is not easy. It's not easy to read poetry. You have to stop sometimes and figure out the metaphor, figure out the word usage. Why does this sound this way? What is the author trying to accomplish? And especially in Hebrew poetry, how do they rhyme? Do they rhyme words? All right, they rhyme thoughts, is at least I think the best way that I've heard to describe it. So they run in parallels. Sometimes it's opposite parallels or antithetic parallelism. Sometimes it's multiple parts to a single parallel. Sometimes they run a parallel system that feeds thoughts to a major thought and then parallels all of the thoughts back to the beginning point again, the chiastic structure. Remember talking about that. But there's all kinds of things that are particular to especially Hebrew poetry and the way that they run their parallelism that, as Cliff says, you have to stop and slow down and spend some time trying to figure out, what does the author mean by this? What is it that I'm really being asked to think about? And the Proverbs are full of those. When you think of wisdom literature, sometimes you might go to the Psalms and you think, well, it's all about the Psalms. Sometimes, because the Psalms is in the Hebrew scriptures, and therefore when Jesus refers to the books of wisdom, he refers to the Psalms, right? I mean, we know that. We see it. Sometimes the Psalms are kind of the figurehead for all of the wisdom literature. But wisdom literature in and of itself, the Proverbs are the quintessential form of wisdom literature, which makes them so cool and just so powerful. So, what are Proverbs? Now, this one I haven't given you a definition. I'm not going to. This is up for discussion here. I don't have a specific answer. So your answer will be, there's no right or wrong answer unless you give the wrong one, really. Yeah, Isaac, what were you? Okay, Isaac says wise sayings. That's pretty good right there, isn't it? Yeah, Jeff?
Exhortation.
Okay, exhortation. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are exhortation that aren't Proverbs, right? So, specifically, and that's kind of answering what are Proverbs doing, exhorting and helping. But what are they just in and of themselves? Dave, you look like you're thinking about jumping in there. And well, hold on, because Ryan's coming around with the mic there for the folks at home. All right, go ahead.
One characteristic typically is that they're pithy, they're short,
Uh-huh.
and memorable in their word pictures, and so it's something that you can kind of carry around with you, and that maybe things that are happening around you may spark you to remember that.
Okay.
That saying.
So I like that, pithy. They're pithy, they're short, they're memorable. Wise sayings that are memorable, that are helpful teaching. And like Jeff said, I'm not taking anything away from what Jeff said. Their whole point is exhortation and encouragement. They're supposed to, well, I'll go ahead, Becky.
Kind of hard to choose the words to explain, but in my mind, the Proverbs are the heart of Jesus and his character.
I'm sorry, the heart of?
Jesus and his character.
Okay, the heart of Jesus and his character. And that's very astute, because what is it that Jesus says about himself? A lot of things, right? But he says one who is wiser than Solomon is here with you, right? That Jesus is encapsulated by the idea of wisdom. And often, doesn't Jesus teach in short, pithy statements and kinds of ways? Sometimes, maybe not Proverbs, but parables come out in the same type of teaching, the same manner of wise teachings that come in a way that force people to slow down and think about them, meditate on them, and try to understand what's being taught. Yeah, Joshua, do you have something? All right, go ahead.
Says that the only person that's smarter than David or with Solomon is the Lord, because he knows more stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Solomon, remember, is kind of held up as the wisest of the wise for good reason. And Jesus says there's one even wiser here. Now, are all the Proverbs wise pithy, short, encouraging, teaching statements, are they all here in Proverbs? No. Do we have modern day Proverbs? Anybody think of any? All right. Kelly says a stitch in time saves 9. How many of y'all have heard of that one? Yeah. Isn't that a proverb? Isn't that a small, short, wise saying meant to encourage somebody to do what? What's that? All right, preventive maintenance, Isaac says, to fix a problem before the problem gets worse, right? That makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? All right, any others? Spare the rod, spoil the child. That's actually kind of biblical. Yeah. Yeah, Kevin? Measure twice, cut once. Yes. Now, usually for me, it's measure twice, cut twice. That's usually how I end up doing projects. But yeah, measure twice, cut once. Yeah, and it's just a quick way of reminding yourself. That's not just, by the way, in woodworking, right? I mean, that goes to the metaphor extends to all kinds of things. Be careful, double check before you actually make a move that you cannot take back, right? Speaking, measure twice, cut once, right? Make sure. Run it through your head. What are the consequences of what I'm about to vomit out of my mouth here? Because once those words are out, I can't put them back in, right? Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? What about early to bed, early to rise? What's the rest of it? Makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? A penny saved is a penny earned, right? You've heard these things. These are proverbs. That's what these are. Short, pithy statements of wisdom that carry a larger punch, that are meant to help and encourage people to act in a certain way. So this is what we're dealing with when we open up to the Proverbs. Now, to look at the Proverbs themselves, they carry a certain structure. I'm just going to kind of give an outline for Proverbs. Some of y'all might have seen different outlines for Proverbs, but I think this one really works. So chapters 1 through 9, and this is where I say that Proverbs is an invitation to wisdom. We're going to look very specifically at some of this in chapters 1 through 9 in just a moment to illustrate this point, why I say this. But chapters 1 through 9 are a block in Proverbs. The Proverbs, as we know them, think of them, and love them, don't really start until chapter 10. Chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs it's a different structure, different way of doing things. You have some statements, sure, but the vast majority of it isn't just statement, 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 statement. There's a flow of thought that's taking place in chapters 1 through 9. That's the Father's invitation. Starting in chapter 10, you have the Proverbs of Solomon. I guess I should have started with this. Who wrote the Proverbs? What's that? Lots of people. Yeah, we attribute it to Solomon. Solomon is accredited with a vast majority of the Proverbs, and that's fine, but it's not like he wrote everything that's in there. In fact, I would suggest that Proverbs, as we know them, as we have them, it's not even completely Israelite authors. That they pull things in from the Gentiles, and the wisdom that's out there, even that is brought in and is included, especially once we get to the end. You have the 30 sayings of the wise, starting there midway through chapter 22. It's called they call it the 30 sayings, and then in the rest of chapter 24, it's further sayings. And then you have chapters 25 through chapter 29, which seem to be Hezekiah's collection of Solomon's Proverbs. And so these are further Proverbs that are attributed to Solomon, brought in there at the end. But then you get into chapters 30 and 31, and you have the sayings of Agur, followed by the sayings of Lemuel. And then you have the section at the end of Proverbs 31. And we're going to, by the way, spend some time in chapter 31 with the sayings of Lemuel. And then I call it the alphabet of womanly excellence. Typically you'd think the alphabet, except that it follows the Hebrew alphabet, which is Aleph, Bet is the first ones. But those two, perhaps even both sections, could be from the sayings of this guy named Lemuel. And so there's a lot of debate. Is it a new author or a new speaker once you get to, that should say verses 10 through 30, not 9 there. But there's some debate whether or not there's a new author or if it's the same. But we'll talk about all that when we get there. All right, questions on this outline or anything we've talked about so far? All right, I didn't think there probably would be. This is all kind of introductory stuff. We haven't really gotten to a point of things that require discussion. So let's get into chapters 1 through 9. And we're just, with the remainder of our time, we're going to go verse by verse through these 9 chapters. No, I'm kidding. We're going to look, if you turn to Proverbs chapter 1, and we're going to start there in verse 1, and we're going to see how this invitation to wisdom ultimately begins. So Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 1, and I'll do it from the ESV instead of the CSB since I've got this open here. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing and righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my son, your father's instruction. Forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. And then he's going to keep going from there. How does Solomon begin Proverbs? What are your thoughts on what we just read? Kevin, over here. Well, hold on one second. We're going to let the microphone get to you. There you go.
He starts with the purpose,
Okay, what is that purpose?
to understand wisdom.
Okay. That's it, right? He starts with this purpose to whom? His son. All right, he says this is parental discussion to his son. And by the way, who is the son? Yeah. He had more than Rehoboam as a son, though, probably, assuming, given the vast amount of women that he had in his life, right? But royal court, high-level leaders. I mean, that's who his son is. Keep that in mind as you read through the Proverbs, because do all the Proverbs come across as someone in royalty talking to someone in royalty? They don't. Solomon is not trying to be specific and saying son, whether it's Rehoboam or whoever his son is, this is meant for you as a soon-to-be king. This is your wisdom. This is very much put together as a generic father-to-son discussion that is going to be applicable and helpful across the board. In fact, there's a whole lot more discussion that would be more relevant to folks like us than to folks in ivory towers, right? I mean, this gets down to earth, real life, working in the fields and being, a servant and how to deal with other people. This is really more applicable here. So, yes, this is Solomon to his son, but this is an every man to an every son. Does that make sense? Solomon is not trying to say, here's the instruction specific to my kid. This is instruction and wisdom from every parent to every kid. And he says, let the wise increase in learning. Let the one who understands obtain guidance. And he boils all of this down to what in verse 7?
Fear of the Lord is the
right.
beginning.
The fear of the Lord, he says, is the beginning of knowledge. Elsewhere, he says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Both of those are in parallel, wisdom and knowledge. He says, understanding your place before God is the beginning of the path to knowledge. It's the beginning of the path to wisdom. Everything in here, Solomon takes all of the ideas, the concepts of wisdom that's out there, which, by the way, did the Hebrews, ancient Hebrews, did they have monopoly on wisdom? No, not at all. We have wisdom literature from the Egyptians, I think from the Akkadians, from all kinds of wisdom literature that's out there, and a lot of it sounds the same, to the point that people are like, they just borrowed from other people. So what if they did? Maybe they did. Maybe they said, yeah, this is wise. Therefore, we should what? We should incorporate it in our own. Who cares where it comes from? Wisdom is wisdom. Yeah, Kevin?
Add to your point there that the other nations took the Lord out of the equation.
Yep.
In
That's
the
where we're
dealing of
going.
wisdom. That's where you're going. So I'm robbing from your power.
No.
But anyway, that's fine.
No, that's exactly right. What is the difference between the wisdom of the Hebrews and the wisdom of those other nations? I think Kevin nails it. They don't begin with the basis of the fear of the Lord. They may have wisdom, but their wisdom is not going to be skill in the art of godly living. It's just skill where they look around and they say, what should we do? And by the way, what is it? Let me put it this way. Is worldly wisdom always going to be the same? Well, it's not an oxymoron. Like I said, are there other nations at the time of Israel that say the same things that the Israelites say in their wisdom literature? Absolutely. There are. I mean, to the point where it does look like they borrowed, but what's the difference? Okay, say that into the mic, because I think that's important for us to understand.
Worldly wisdom changes as society changes.
Yeah.
And they change their way of thinking, so they change their wisdom. God's wisdom is always the same.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Does worldly wisdom today look the same as worldly wisdom in antiquity? No. Society has gone through all kinds of changes and metamorphosis and evolution, or however you want to talk about it. Worldly wisdom, societal wisdom, all of that has changed drastically through the years. But what about the word of the Lord? Stands forever, right? It's not going to change. And there will be moments in time in which worldly wisdom is going to look exactly like godly wisdom, because there are some folks out there who kind of thought, hey, you know what? This system works, doesn't it? And this is what we should espouse. But there are going to be other times, and this gets to what Becky was saying just a second ago, other times in which worldly wisdom looks the exact opposite of what wisdom actually is, because it's not constrained first and foremost by the fear of the Lord. And the fear of the Lord is what presents or creates the wisdom that's found within the Proverbs. All right. Let's go to chapter 9. We're going to look at the bookends of this first section, chapters 1 through 9. There's a whole lot of stuff that we could discuss throughout here. A lot of this has to do with the pitfalls that are very specific to young men, particularly following after wisdom. No, that's not a pitfall. Following after women is a big difference. Following after women, I almost said it again. This could be a long class if I can't tell the difference between the two. Following down paths that they shouldn't be going down, doing things they shouldn't be doing, falling into traps that are being laid, all those types of things that you find through here. But you get to chapter 9, and here's the ending point of Solomon's basic invitation, starting verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She slaughtered her beasts. She mixed her wine. She set her table. She sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To the one who lacks, she says, come, eat of my bread, drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer, let me go ahead and start there at the end of verse 6. What is wisdom? By the way, there are two ideas, concepts personified. Everybody know what personification is? What it means that something is personified? Are there any questions? Something being personified. Take something that does not have a personhood and then giving it personhood or personality, giving it attributes of being a person. And so wisdom is spoken of as a person. Lady Wisdom is how it's described. Is wisdom a person? No, but poetry allows for this. And so now you have wisdom who is doing what? Personified. Wisdom personified as a person. Wisdom is doing what?
Entertaining?
Okay, entertaining. That's exactly right. Setting up, what would we call this? Setting up a banquet for, like Ryan said, the purposes of entertaining. You've slaughtered the beast. You've got all of the things out there. You've sent out the call, and you've said, hey, all of you who are simple. What does that mean? Naive. Who lack what? All of you who lack wisdom, come and join me. Sit at my table. Leave your simple ways. Live and walk in the way of my insight. Verse 5, come, eat my bread and drink the wine that I have mixed. And so here, wisdom is described as setting up a banquet and sending out folks to say, hey, come in here to learn wisdom. But she's not the only one that's setting something up, because you then have, starting in verse 13, the woman folly. You have wisdom and folly, right? Being wise, being foolish. The woman folly is loud. She is seductive. And she knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat at the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to the one who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, and her guests are in the depths of Sheol. What is Lady Folly doing? All right, Dave says she's sending out her own invitation, isn't she? Going to the high places, calling to people, you who are simple, what? Turn in here. Come to me. Now, does she have a banquet prepared for them? What does she have prepared for them? Death. Those who come and dine with her end up in Sheol, end up in death. That's all that she has to offer. And this is how Solomon ends chapters 1 through 9. That's it. That's the ending point before you step into the rest. Let me suggest that that's purposeful. Because right now, he has laid out for you, the reader of Proverbs, two separate invitations. You have an invitation at this moment where you can go to wisdom's banquet, go and feast on the life that she gives. Listen, come and eat her bread, drink her wine. That is the ability to leave your simple ways, to take in wisdom so that you will no longer be simple, you will no longer be foolish. You will leave those ways and you will become one who walks in the way of insight. Wisdom offers you that invitation, but folly is offering you the same invitation over here, saying, come in your simple ways and remain in your simple ways, and that is a path that's going to lead to death. And now the invitation is yours from both, and the question to you, the reader, is this: which path will you choose? Will you choose wisdom's banquet or folly's banquet? And how do you make that choice? Dale? Okay, something more practical. Dale said, fear the Lord, but what? Hold on. Up here to Jan. I want to make sure this one gets into the mic. Go ahead, Jan. How do you choose?
Read the next chapters.
Your choice is either go flip the page and go into chapter 10 and enter the banquet of wisdom, or close the book and remain in folly. That's the choice that's being presented. Chapters 1 through 9 present what I call an invitation to wisdom, or an invitation to wisdom's banquet. Let me suggest the wise thing to do would be to go on into chapter 10. Are we in agreement on that one? Is there anybody that's like, you know what, I'd rather close it up and just go home now? All right. Yeah, this is exactly what we are supposed to be doing. So let's look then at the Proverbs of Solomon. We're not going to get through everything here because I was wanting to get through, in particular, chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. I think that provides a good snippet for us to get a good feel for what the Proverbs are doing. But before that, I want to at least look at Solomonic wisdom and how the Proverbs of Solomon work. When you think of the Proverbs are really pictures. I mean, that's what they are, right? When you read a proverb, it is putting a picture in your mind of something. If it talks about the man, you guys are familiar, with the one who can't even bring his hand to his mouth to eat, right? He's so lazy. Can you picture a man who's sitting there just slumped over at the table and he puts his whole hand in his food and he's like, oh, it's just too much work. Can you picture that? Yeah, that's all it's doing. They're bringing out pictures. And very specifically, let me suggest that the Proverbs, and actually a lot of biblical writing, but the Proverbs are caricatures. What's a caricature? All right. Ryan, I'll let you get back there to Kelly, because, Go ahead, Kelly.
An overblown picture of something.
All right.
An oversimplification and over pointing out of a flaw.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, an oversimplification, overblown, and it very much focuses on specific characteristics of an individual, right? How many of you guys know who this is? Who is this guy? Conan, right? Conan O'Brien, right? Some of y'all may not know him, and that's fine. You don't have to know who this is. It was just one of the easiest caricatures of all the ones I looked at. I'm like, this does a really good job of bringing out a caricature of this individual. Is this what Conan O'Brien actually looks like? All right. This is what Conan O'Brien actually looks like. Okay? Can you see the difference between these two? Yes. Okay, good. I'm hoping that you're able to see the difference. However, let me just go back. When I put that picture up, you knew who it was, didn't you? Why? Even though this is what the guy looks like, why? What's it doing? All right, it's exaggerating, not just exaggerating his features, which, that is what it's doing, but it's exaggerating the features that what? Are unique to him. It takes features and then really emphasizes those things. Oftentimes, especially in political cartoons and stuff, it is done to try to make someone look silly or look dumb in order to mock them and belittle them, which is why I didn't try to pull up any of those, because that's not the point. That's not what I'm trying to get across here. But if you look at Conan right here and his features, look at that forehead. I don't think there's any comparison between me and Conan as far as the forehead goes, right? That is quite the forehead that he has on his noggin. Do you see that over here in the caricature? Yeah, that's accentuated to an extreme degree. Check out the hair, the little wave in the hair that he has. That is further accentuated here. His smile, is really brought out. And so, yeah, there's a whole lot of things about him, these very unique characteristics that are emphasized. That's what a caricature does. It takes very specific things and it overblows them. It overemphasizes them to a great degree. What is a caricature not trying to do? What's that? Okay, true. It is not trying or attempting to be true to form. That is, to explain things in the most absolute way. It's not trying to be exhaustive. It's giving enough of a picture for you to see the things that really matter, and then the rest of the stuff is almost kind of throwaway, isn't it, to some degree? It's there. You can see the rest of his body and his hands and things like that. But that's not where the attention is drawn. So, what does that have to do with the Proverbs? Okay, hold on 1 second. Let's let the microphone get up here. Okay, say that again.
It uses caricatures of wisdom and folly to emphasize the flaws and strengths of either one.
Okay, uses the caricatures or the characteristics, very specific characteristics of wisdom and folly, certain ones, and really blows those up and puts those in your face, while there's a lot of other things that aren't really talked about much. Which is why, how many of y'all have got bogged down in a discussion of the Proverbs that is a yeah, but discussion? Where the Proverb says, and we'll just use a penny saved is a penny earned. And you say, well, is that true all of the time? How many of y'all have heard that in discussion of the Proverbs? Is this true all of the time? You've heard that? You have heard that, right, in discussions of Proverbs? that we know, that we understand, that, when we talk about certain things, the righteous is delivered from trouble and the wicked walks into it instead. Is that an every time? No, we know that's not every time, right? Are there times that the righteous go into trouble and they're not delivered from it? Absolutely. Are there times that the wicked get away with their wickedness and never run into trouble? Absolutely. Even other wisdom literature. We talked about Job brought this out, right? Ecclesiastes brings this out. There are Psalms that bring this out. This isn't an all the time, every time aspect. And I think it's important that we understand that. We can get bogged down by playing the yeah, but game, where we say, well, it does say the righteous is delivered from trouble, the wicked walks into it instead, but sometimes, or in this case, or in this instance, or, when we do that, we're missing the point. The Proverbs are not trying to be exhaustive. They're not trying to give you definitive if-then statements. This isn't an all-the-time conditional thing that your success is going to be conditioned by following this specific proverb to its conclusion, and the outcome is always guaranteed. That's not what we're doing. It's not meant to do that type of thing. The wisdom of the Proverbs, they're not interested in the exceptions. Each proverb is focused on basically, generally, one basic principle of wisdom or folly to the exclusion of the others. Each proverb is bringing out one aspect of it. And I think we understand that, right? All right, so let's see. The purpose of the Proverbs, let me just get Conan here off the screen here. The purpose of the Proverbs is to create, I think, a certain kind of person, a caricature of a godly person. And a caricature, as Kelly said earlier, is oversimplified, isn't it? Are the Proverbs trying to create a character that covers every facet of who and what we are as godly people? No. It's not its intention. The wisdom literature, it doesn't work that way. But it is trying to say, these are the characteristics. I guess I'll put Conan back up here. These are, if you assume, and you'll never assume Conan to be the epitome of wisdom, but if you were to look at this caricature and say, this is what wisdom does, wisdom focuses on these defining characteristics, these things that really outwardly and inwardly depict what wisdom looks like. It tries to show the character of a wise person, the godly person. And a godly person will, generally speaking, have these basic types of characteristics that will stick out to everybody else. The Proverbs try to show the character of a foolish person and what we do not want to look like, these characteristics that stick out. So again, the point is not to say every single parable is applicable to everyone in the exact same way, because they're just not. I mean, that's just not wisdom literature. That's not the way that it works. Some of these things are going to hit some people one way, and they'll hit someone else in a completely different way. Sometimes you're supposed to read these in such a way where you make the necessary changes to be applicable for you as well. Such as, how many of y'all have heard Proverbs? Have I been saying parables for a while? Okay, if I have, just, go with what I mean on that one. Sorry about that. Proverbs. How many of y'all have heard Proverbs about a nagging wife? Yeah? Right? Yeah. If you are a man reading this proverb, about a nagging wife, how are you supposed to understand that? If you're a woman, perhaps you understand it and say, maybe I shouldn't be a nagging wife. Maybe. But if you're a man reading this, what are you supposed to take away? What? Maybe I shouldn't be a nagging husband? What creates a nagging wife? Why does a wife start to nag? It's because the husband's not. Bev was all into that. She's like, I got that answer. What were you going to say, Bev? All right, hold on, wait for the microphone because you're exactly right.
You're forced to repeat yourself because the person is not responding and paying attention to what you're saying.
Yeah. The reason there's a nagging wife is because you have a husband who is forcing that kind of behavior by his behavior. And maybe if the husband changes his behavior, and I don't know, does what it is that he's being asked to do, take care of doing what it is that he said that he would do, actually listen to what was being said, is she going to end up being a nagging wife? No. And so this hits differently to different people based on who they are, what situation they're in, what they're doing, right? We make necessary changes as we read this to say, what basis of this wisdom can I focus on? What can I take away from this? How does this affect me? So the point is not to say every single proverb is applicable to everyone the exact same way, but to say when we put the proverbs together, and we put this proverb and this proverb, and by the way, this is what we'll do starting off next week. When we put these proverbs together and we start looking at them in this way, what is the picture that begins to emerge? What is the caricature of a godly person that we start to see? That's what we're after. It's not an application of the Proverbs and saying, okay, we're going to spend our time. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. And we say, okay, well, let's discuss that one. And we discuss it and we say, okay, are we done talking about false balances? And okay, well, we put that in that compartment. Now let's move on to a completely, wholly unrelated, separate, totally different proverb. Well, no, it may be a completely different proverb, but the pictures should start sticking together. That the type of person who uses a true and just balance is the same type of person who's going to work his work in the fields and not do what he shouldn't be doing. He's the same type of person that's going to treat people the way that they deserve to be treated. He's the same type of person that's going to give honor to his mother and his father and listen to their words. Can you see how all of these things really piece together and they give a caricature of the type of person? This isn't instruction saying do this, don't do this. It is creating a picture of what we should be, because that's what wisdom looks like. It's not an application of each individual proverb, but getting to the point that we begin to look like caricature of a godly person, even if some of them may not be applicable to us or are applicable in different ways. All right. Does that all make sense? Because I think this is really important, and we're going to follow down this path some more, like I said, next week, really looking at, and this is a term, I'm going to throw it out here, so you can go ahead and just be like, all right, I've heard the term, that's fine. Co-referentiality. All right, so everybody knows what that means, right? All that means is that there are characteristics that are being referred to. Whenever it talks, and we'll get into this next week, all the Proverbs seem to be a contrast between two things, right? Wisdom, folly. The lazy, the industrious, right? The righteous and the wicked. All the Proverbs seem to be a contrast between two pictures of the wise and the fool. And so everything that seems to be on the positive side is all referring to the same person, the wise person. It's all what's called co-referential, or referring to the same thing. They're all referring to the same person. All the negatives are referring to the same negative person. And so therefore, the one who is wise is industrious, is respectful. All of those references, and then the same thing. We're going to see how this works next week as we get into chapter 10, and then see a bigger picture from there. Julia? Okay, Mike's here. Go ahead.
I've just been thinking back to what you asked at the beginning about the difference between worldly wisdom and godly wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had the thought that one of the biggest differences is that godly wisdom transcends all cultures, all differences in time, place, that you could take a person with godly wisdom and put them in any culture throughout history and they would still be a godly, wise person, no matter where they were. The specifics might be different, but they will still be who they're supposed to be.
Yep, and that is, and again, this is discussion for, this is priming us for discussion next week. But that idea that this person, this wise person from ancient Israelite culture and cultural context can be picked up and placed in any other cultural context, and the caricature remains the same. Even if the details change, the caricature remains the same. And that's what Julie was saying, and I think that's absolutely true. Hopefully, this is our discussion we'll get into next week. All right. Looks like I am out of time, so I'm going to turn this over to Richard. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Good discussion.